On the morning of the 14th of September 2011, a woman known to her few neighbors in the Cypriot port city of Limassol as Lena Petrova stood on her balcony, ostensibly sketching the chaotic beauty of the old harbor. Her apartment, a modest third-floor walk-up in a crumbling Venetian-era building, afforded her a commanding view of the docks, a panorama of fishing trawlers, coastal freighters, and the perpetual motion of maritime commerce. To any casual observer, she was precisely what her carefully constructed identity purported her to be: a reclusive Russian-Israeli artist in her late 30s, seeking solace and inspiration in the Mediterranean light. Her easel held a canvas of half-finished charcoal lines. Her hands were smudged with graphite, and two well-fed cats sunned themselves at her feet. In reality, the charcoal was a prop. The cats were a crucial element of her operational cover, and her gaze was not that of an artist, but of a trained intelligence officer. Her name was not Lena, and her true purpose in Limassol had nothing to do with art and everything to do with dismantling a critical logistics network responsible for arming one of Israel's most formidable enemies. She was a Katsa of the Mossad, and her long, patient vigil was the central pillar of an operation codenamed Medusa's Gaze. The strategic problem that necessitated Lena's existence had crystallized in the years following the 2006 Lebanon War. Israeli intelligence had noted a significant and alarming evolution in the quality and quantity of weaponry reaching Hezbollah. What had once been a flow of relatively unsophisticated rockets and anti-tank munitions was becoming a torrent of advanced systems: guided anti-ship missiles, sophisticated man-portable air defense systems, and components for precision-guided munitions that could threaten strategic assets deep within Israeli territory. The source was clear: Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, but the delivery method had become maddeningly opaque. The primary overland route through Syria was still active, but was now being supplemented by a far more flexible and deniable maritime corridor. Small, seemingly innocuous vessels would leave Iranian or Syrian ports, transfer their illicit cargo to other ships in the open sea, and utilize a complex web of intermediary ports in southern Europe to obscure the final destination. Cyprus, with its strategic location, bustling ports, and historically complex political environment, had been identified by Mossad's research division as a key node in this network. Previous attempts to interdict shipments based on signals intelligence had proven largely futile. The network's communications were heavily encrypted, using frequency-hopping protocols that were nearly impossible to crack in real time, and route plans were often altered at the last minute based on coded messages broadcast over commercial radio frequencies. Several high-stakes attempts to intercept vessels at sea had resulted in embarrassing failures, yielding nothing more than holds full of rotting fish or cheap textiles. It became painfully clear to the upper echelons of Mossad's Caesarea department, which handled special operations, that technological surveillance alone was insufficient. They could see the shadows of the network but could not illuminate its core. To dismantle it, they needed a human asset on the ground, someone who could patiently map the infrastructure, identify the key personnel, and pinpoint the precise moment of vulnerability. The stakes were existential. Allowing the network to continue operating unchecked meant accepting a future in which Hezbollah possessed a deterrent capability that could paralyze northern Israel and fundamentally alter the regional balance of power. The central figure orchestrating this logistical hub, the target of Medusa's Gaze, was a man named Samir Kadiri. His profile, painstakingly assembled by Mossad analysts from fragmented intelligence reports, human source debriefings, and digital intercepts, painted a picture not of a fervent ideologue, but of a supremely competent and pragmatic professional. Kadiri, in his early 50s, was a former commander in the Lebanese Navy, cashiered in the late 1990s for corruption. Disgraced but retaining his extensive maritime knowledge and contacts, he had transitioned into the lucrative world of illicit logistics. He was not a member of Hezbollah, nor did he espouse the revolutionary rhetoric of his Iranian employers. His motivation was purely financial, a fact that made him both reliable and, in theory, predictable. He operated under the guise of a legitimate shipping and logistics consultancy, a small, unassuming office near the Limassol port that handled paperwork for dozens of legitimate businesses. This provided him with the perfect cover to manage the clandestine side of his enterprise. Kadiri was defined by his meticulous paranoia. He trusted no one completely, compartmentalizing information so that no single subordinate ever saw the full picture of an operation. He eschewed modern digital communication for personal matters, preferring face-to-face meetings in crowded, noisy cafes where surveillance was difficult. His personal life was a fortress of routine. The same breakfast at the same cafe every morning, the same route to his office, the same 3 restaurants for dinner, rotated in a predictable sequence. He had no close friends. His family was kept at a distance in Lebanon, and his only apparent indulgence was a passion for vintage nautical charts. This disciplined, almost ascetic lifestyle made him an exceptionally difficult target to penetrate. He had built a world around himself that was deliberately small, controlled, and devoid of obvious vulnerabilities. The challenge for Mossad was not simply to find him, but to find a way into this hermetically sealed world without triggering the tripwires of his deeply ingrained suspicion. The solution proposed by the mission planners in Tel Aviv was audacious in its simplicity and staggering in its complexity and risk. Instead of attempting a direct penetration of Kadiri's inner circle, which was deemed impossible, they would place a deep-cover operative in his immediate vicinity for an indefinite period. This operative's sole function would be to exist, to observe, and to become such a mundane part of the local scenery that their presence would eventually become invisible to Kadiri's hyper-vigilant senses. The plan, which became Operation Medusa's Gaze, was a testament to the organization's belief in long-term, human-centric intelligence gathering. The operative would not be tasked with making contact or recruiting sources. They would be a passive sensor, a human camera documenting every detail of Kadiri's life and operation until a precise vulnerability could be identified and exploited by a separate action team. The obstacles were formidable. The linguistic and cultural barriers were significant. The operative needed to be fluent not only in Greek, but also in the specific social nuances of a tight-knit Cypriot port community. The technical challenges of maintaining secure communications from a static, long-term position without creating a detectable electronic footprint were immense. Most critically, the risk of exposure was constant and absolute. If the operative's cover were ever compromised, it would not only result in their certain death, but would also trigger a catastrophic diplomatic crisis with Cyprus and potentially expose other Mossad networks across Europe. The mission required an operative of extraordinary psychological resilience, someone capable of enduring profound isolation and the unrelenting tension of living a fabricated life for months, or even years, with no guarantee of success. It was a strategy of infinite patience, a high-stakes gamble that the routine of a paranoid man would eventually become his undoing. The woman selected for this demanding role was an operative named Yael. Her recruitment into Mossad was not driven by abstract patriotism but by a deeply personal history steeped in the very conflict she was now tasked with influencing. In the summer of 2006, a Hezbollah-launched Katyusha rocket had struck her family's home near Kiryat Shmona, killing her parents and younger sister instantly. Yael, who was serving her compulsory military duty at the time, was left with a grief so profound it calcified into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. This tragic crucible had forged within her a singular sense of purpose, which was identified by Mossad recruiters as an ideal psychological foundation for the rigors of deep-cover work. Her motivation was not for glory or adventure, but for a calculated, methodical form of vengeance that she equated with national security. Her subsequent training at the Mossad Academy, the Midrasha, was an exercise in systematic deconstruction and reconstruction of her identity. She underwent intensive language immersion, spending 18 months mastering not just formal Greek, but the colloquialisms, accents, and cultural idioms of coastal Cyprus. She learned to speak Arabic with a flawless Beiruti accent, a contingency skill in case of capture or the need to understand conversations she might overhear. Her practical skills training was relentless. Advanced techniques in surveillance and counter-surveillance, the art of creating and maintaining dead drops, the mastery of microphotography, and the psychological discipline of compartmentalization, the ability to divorce her operational self from her core identity and emotions. She was trained in the philosophy of being a gray person, someone so unremarkable and devoid of distinguishing features that they could fade into any background, leaving no lasting impression on those they encountered. The final phase of her conditioning focused on psychological endurance, subjecting her to simulated interrogations and prolonged periods of isolation to build her resistance to the mental erosion that was the greatest enemy of the long-term solo operative. The construction of her cover identity, Lena Petrova, was an intelligence operation in itself, a masterpiece of fabrication executed by Mossad's logistics and technology divisions. The goal was to create a legend so robust it could withstand not just casual scrutiny, but a dedicated background investigation. The persona of a Russian-Israeli artist was chosen with deliberate care. It plausibly explained her presence in Cyprus, accounted for any accent imperfections, and provided a legitimate reason for her irregular hours and her focus on the port. A team of specialists built her a comprehensive digital footprint that stretched back years. They created social media profiles with mundane posts, a blog featuring her artwork, created by an actual artist on Mossad's payroll, and a portfolio on several art community websites. They fabricated a complete personal history, birth records, university transcripts from the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design, and employment records from a Tel Aviv graphic design firm. A bank account was opened in her name and populated with a carefully managed transaction history, showing a small inheritance and sporadic income from art sales, all funneled through shell corporations. Her apartment in Limassol was selected after weeks of painstaking surveillance by a preliminary team. It was chosen not only for its superior line of sight to Kadiri's primary areas of operation, but also for its structural acoustics and the electronic environment of the neighborhood. The two cats, named Phobos and Deimos, were not just props. They were a brilliant piece of operational cover. They justified her regular purchases of cat food at a specific market, anchored her to a domestic routine, provided a plausible reason for her to be home at all hours, and served as an early warning system, as their behavior would change in response to any unusual disturbances near the apartment. Every element of Lena's life, from the brand of tea in her cupboard to the worn paperbacks on her shelf, was a carefully chosen detail in an elaborate and utterly convincing fiction. The technology developed to support her mission was equally meticulous, designed for absolute discretion and reliability. Her primary surveillance tool was not a pair of binoculars, but a Celestron C90 Maksutov telescope, a common and powerful device for amateur astronomers, which had been purchased from a local hobby shop to avoid suspicion. However, the device had been covertly modified by Mossad's technical specialists. Its internal mirrors and eyepiece were replaced with a high-resolution, military-grade digital imaging sensor, capable of capturing clear images from over 2 kilometers away, even in low light. The sensor was linked via a fiber optic cable, no thicker than a human hair, and hidden along the baseboards, to a hardened computer concealed within a false bottom of her linen closet. This system allowed her to photograph individuals, document license plates, and record vessel registration numbers without ever appearing to be doing anything more than stargazing. For communications, she was equipped with a custom-built router that contained a passive signals intelligence receiver. Outwardly, it provided her apartment with a standard internet connection, but its hidden function was to silently scan and map the local radio frequency spectrum, identifying and logging encrypted transmissions emanating from the port area. To send her own intelligence back to Tel Aviv, she used a burst transmission device disguised as a universal power adapter. When she plugged it into a wall socket, it would compress her encrypted reports and photographs into a data packet of a few milliseconds and transmit it over a secure satellite link, timing the burst to coincide with moments of high ambient electronic noise, such as the passing of a municipal bus, making the transmission virtually undetectable. Another key piece of tactical equipment was a small, aerosol-based chemical marker. The chemical was invisible to the naked eye and odorless, but it fluoresced brightly under a specific, narrow wavelength of ultraviolet light. The plan was for Lena to apply this marker to a vehicle or object belonging to one of Kadiri's associates, which would then allow satellite or drone-based sensors to track its movements throughout the city and beyond, revealing secondary locations like safe houses or storage facilities. Yael's insertion into Limassol as Lena Petrova in the late spring of 2011 was a study in methodical patience. She arrived on a commercial flight from Athens, not Tel Aviv, with 2 suitcases, a cat carrier, and a portfolio of her art. Her first 2 months were dedicated entirely to establishing her cover and embedding herself into the local environment. She did no surveillance. She made no attempts to locate Kadiri. Her sole focus was on becoming Lena Petrova. She established a predictable but unobtrusive routine. She would spend her mornings painting on her balcony or walking along the seafront, her afternoons at a local cafe reading Russian novels, and her evenings at home. She made small talk with the owner of the corner grocery store, learned the names of her neighbors' children, and adopted a demeanor of polite aloofness. She was friendly but distant, the perfect combination to discourage intimacy while still appearing normal. She was creating a baseline of behavior, a pattern of normalcy that would serve as her camouflage. Her handler, communicating through encrypted, prearranged messages hidden in the metadata of seemingly innocuous images on a public photo-sharing website, constantly reinforced the mission's primary directive: patience over progress. There was to be no rush, no forcing of opportunities. The operation would proceed at the target's pace, not theirs. During this period, Yael's psychological conditioning was tested to its limits. The profound isolation, the constant need to perform, and the absence of any tangible progress created a gnawing mental pressure. She existed in a state of suspended reality, a ghost inhabiting a life that was not her own, surrounded by people she could never know, all while maintaining the serene facade of a woman at peace with her solitude. After 3 months of disciplined inactivity, once her presence had become an accepted part of the local fabric, Yael began the active phase of her surveillance. The transition was seamless. Her morning sketching sessions on the balcony now incorporated the meticulous use of the modified telescope. She began building a comprehensive pattern of life analysis of Samir Kadiri. Every detail was logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. The exact time he left his apartment, the model and license plate of the car that picked him up, the duration of his meetings at the port, the identities of the men he met with. She used a notebook filled with charcoal sketches of boats and seagulls to conceal her handwritten surveillance logs, written in a personal shorthand code. After weeks of this passive observation, she identified Kadiri's most trusted lieutenant, a man named Fadi, who acted as his driver, bodyguard, and chief enforcer. Fadi was the conduit through which Kadiri interacted with the lower-level operatives of the network. He was also less disciplined than his boss, frequenting bars and exhibiting a flashiness that made him a more viable target for an active measure. The opportunity to deploy the chemical marker came during a crowded weekend market. Yael, following Fadi from a discreet distance, staged an accidental encounter. As he was haggling with a vendor, she stumbled nearby, spilling a bag of oranges. In the ensuing confusion, as Fadi and others bent to help her, she palmed the small aerosol device and, under the cover of gathering her scattered fruit, sprayed a fine, invisible mist onto the rear fender of Fadi's parked scooter. The entire interaction lasted less than 10 seconds. That evening, a Mossad surveillance satellite passing over Cyprus adjusted its sensors. The UV imager detected a faint, telltale glow from the scooter. For the next several weeks, the satellite tracked Fadi's movements, revealing a previously unknown warehouse in an industrial park on the outskirts of the city and a secluded farmhouse in the Troodos Mountains. The network was beginning to reveal its hidden geography. Yael continued her patient watch, her apartment now the nerve center of a sophisticated intelligence-gathering effort. A silent, invisible web, slowly closing in around Samir Kadiri. The culmination of her long vigil arrived in early February 2012. Signals intelligence analysts in Unit 8200, Israel's elite SIGINT division, intercepted a heavily encrypted communication between a known IRGC logistics officer in Tehran and Kadiri's network. While they could not decipher the content, the transmission's specific cryptographic signature and timing matched previous alerts for high-value shipments. This intelligence, combined with Yael's on-the-ground observations of increased activity at the newly identified warehouse, led her case officer to conclude that a critical delivery was imminent. Through her telescope, Yael documented the arrival of a special container, handled with unusual security by Fadi and his team. Her report, sent via her burst transmitter, confirmed that the target was now in play. The plan for the final act was not a direct assault or an assassination. It was something far more subtle and strategically valuable. A black bag operation designed to inspect the shipment, acquire critical intelligence, and, if possible, neutralize the threat without revealing their hand. A team of operators from Sayeret Matkal, the IDF's premier special forces unit, was covertly inserted into Cyprus by sea. Yael's role in this final phase was singular and critical. She was the overwatch, the final confirmation. She would not participate in the entry itself, but she would provide the real-time intelligence necessary for it to succeed. The chosen night was that of the Limassol Carnival, a citywide celebration that would provide noise, crowds, and a general state of distraction for local law enforcement. Yael's final task was to create a minor diversion. At precisely 2:15 a.m., as the Matkal team approached the warehouse, she used a disposable burner phone to place an anonymous call to the fire department, reporting a strong smell of gas from a residential building 6 blocks away from the target location. The call was designed to draw the nearest emergency response units away from the industrial park, buying the entry team a precious, uncontested window of operation. As the distant sound of sirens confirmed her diversion was successful, Yael watched through her telescope, her heart a cold, steady metronome, as several shadowy figures breached the perimeter fence of the warehouse. The Sayeret Matkal team operated with surgical precision. They bypassed the electronic security system, a standard commercial model whose schematics they had already studied, and gained entry to Kadiri's personal office within the warehouse in under 90 seconds. Inside, they located the crate Yael had observed. It contained not a fully assembled weapon, but something far more valuable: a dozen advanced micro-gyroscopes and guidance circuit boards, the core components required to convert unguided rockets into precision munitions. The team photographed everything, carefully documenting serial numbers and design specifications. They then executed the most critical part of their mission. They removed one of the circuit boards and replaced it with a near-perfect, non-functional duplicate that had been fabricated by Mossad's technical division. This duplicate, however, contained a tiny, dormant satellite tracking beacon. They were inside the facility for a total of 11 minutes. When they exfiltrated, they left no trace of their presence. Yael, observing from her balcony 2 kilometers away, confirmed their departure and sent the final, single-word coded message: clean. Her role was now complete. Her extraction, however, was deliberately delayed. Her handler instructed her to remain in place for another 2 weeks to maintain her cover and observe the network's reaction. It was a period of extreme tension. She continued her routine as Lina Petrova, sketching, buying groceries, and feeding her cats, all while monitoring the port for any signs of panic or discovery. She saw nothing. The network, confident in their security, had not detected the intrusion. On the 14th day, she received her final instruction. That evening, she packed a small bag with only a change of clothes and a forged passport. She left everything else behind: her art supplies, her books, her clothes, and the 2 cats, for whom she left a large supply of food and water and an anonymous message for the landlord to find them a new home. She walked out of the apartment and into the night, dissolving back into the shadows from which she had emerged. Lena Petrova had simply ceased to exist. The consequences of Operation Medusa's gaze unfolded with devastating efficiency. The intelligence retrieved from Kadiri's office provided Mossad with a complete technical profile of Iran's new guidance systems, allowing Israeli defense contractors to rapidly develop effective countermeasures. More immediately, the tracking beacon inside the compromised circuit board was activated remotely once the components were consolidated for the next stage of their journey. It led the Israeli Navy to a freighter in the eastern Mediterranean. The vessel, boarded under a plausible pretext of searching for contraband, was found to be carrying not only the guidance systems, but a significant cache of advanced anti-ship missiles. The public seizure was a major strategic and public relations victory for Israel. The fallout within the smuggling network was catastrophic. The Iranians and Hezbollah, unable to comprehend how the shipment had been so precisely located, launched a brutal internal investigation. Suspicion inevitably fell upon Samir Kadiri, the man responsible for the security of the Cyprus node. His meticulous paranoia, which had served him so well, could not protect him from the paranoia of his employers. 2 months after the interception at sea, Kadiri's body was found in an alley in Beirut, a single gunshot wound to the head, the signature of an internal execution. With its leader eliminated and its operational security shattered, the Cyprus network collapsed. The intelligence from Kadiri's office, particularly his detailed ledgers and contact lists, acted as a Rosetta Stone for Mossad analysts. Over the next 18 months, they used the data to systematically map and neutralize interconnected cells in Greece, Italy, and Spain. effectively dismantling the entire southern European maritime route for Iranian arms. The political repercussions were minimal, as the operation had maintained perfect deniability. For Yael, the aftermath was a quiet, internal reckoning. She was debriefed extensively in a safe house outside Tel Aviv, and then given an extended leave. The victory was undeniable, the strategic impact profound. Yet, the woman who had been Lena Petrova felt no elation. The grief that had driven her into the service had not been erased, merely sublimated into the cold, detached calculus of the operation. She had inhabited a false life so completely that returning to her real one felt like a dislocation. The operation had permanently altered her, transforming a personal quest for vengeance into an impersonal function of the state. She had become an instrument, a ghost who could watch and wait and, with a single, patient act, unravel the world of her enemies, forever paying a silent, psychological price for the security she had helped to secure. Was the deep, personal sacrifice of Yael's identity a justifiable price for national security? Can a state, in the pursuit of its own preservation, ethically demand that an individual erase themselves for the greater good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.